Welcome back to Boilers Extra. I'm Nathan Baird from the Indianapolis Star.
Sam King from the Journal and Courier.
Some of you who follow us on Twitter know that earlier this week, it's not called Twitter now, x.com. It's always Twitter to me. It's a candlestick mark. Know that I asked for questions, do kind of an Ask Us Anything podcast. We're going to do that today. This is Wednesday morning as we're recording this, and a lot of questions revolved around Purdue football and the transfer portal and roster makeup, and that could be changing as we speak. Like there could be something popping in any minute. So we'll try to give you the most up-to-date information, at least as things go before we start. Actually, Sam, you have been tracking, so maybe before we get things started, can you kind of give people a rundown of the most significant people who have left? Because I don't think we haven't really done one of these since before the portal opened. So the most significant people who have left, and I think it's as of right now 6 transfer portal additions that Purdue has made, not including some JUCO guys who went technically on the 2026 recruiting class.
Yeah, it's actually 7. If my count's right. Purdue's pulled in a couple of receivers, and statistically, they look pretty good at lower level schools. Asad Wasim from Florida Atlantic and Malik Knight from Western Carolina combined about 1,700 yards and 12 touchdowns between those two. I think obviously the USC connection, you're seeing that with the offensive line with Zach Crabtree having previously worked there, and Josh Henson being the OC at USC. They got a couple of linemen from there. And then I think the big get was Jarrett Gibson, the running back from Texas, just because Purdue needed running back help. And then kind of coupled that with getting Travis Terrell from Jackson State, who seems like a dynamite player. So I know we'll have to go through spring and see some of these guys, and then the real test will be when games start being played. But I think Purdue's probably in good shape, but did lose some key pieces. Chops Harkless being clearly one of the bigger names that went in the portal. Some of the guys did come back. Smiley Bradford coming back was probably the significant returnee. But you lose, you lose a guy like D'Amico Kennedy and Chops Harkless on the defensive line. They're both going to go to the state of Kentucky, one to Louisville, one to Kentucky. I thought Braden Joyner was a big loss. He's going to Florida State. The center started all 12 games last year. And Ahmad Branch is probably going to be a what if for the rest of Purdue eternity. I don't know that he would have helped a whole lot more in the wins column had he played a lot, but we never got a clear-cut answer about why he went from being, a 100-yard receiver for 2 games to basically not being used at all. And now he's going to go play for Brian Hartline, who, if there's anything left in Ahmad Branch, that guy will pull it out of him, I'm sure. So those are definitely the biggest names. Malachi Singleton, the backup quarterback last year, is going to Appalachian State. Is that right? I think Correct. He just recently announced this morning where he's going. But yeah, there's a bunch of guys in the portal. Nitro Tuggle's one that's probably going to draw some major college interest. But some of these guys are replaceable, for lack of a better term. Some of these guys, when you have them in your program, like a Chops Harkless, you would like to keep them there. But I think that keeping that guy specifically is probably a little bit more far-fetched than some of the others. But I don't think there's been anybody that's going to be like, extremely damaging the fact that you lost him through the transfer portal.
So let's just get right into the questions, because there are some follow-up things from what you just said that will come out through the answers that we're going to get into here. And I'm going to try to give credit to the people. Obviously, nobody uses their real name on x.com, but for those of you who have been following and sending us questions, really appreciate it. This is from JT Boiler. Can you explain the dynamic between GM, that's Brandon Lee, and head coach Barry Odom at Purdue when it comes to roster construction and management? And I think that's a good question. I've done some reporting about this and some writing about this, and going back to last season and how they handled it last season, which I believe is how they've handled it again this year, and probably even more so in this structure, because last year the ground was kind of shifting beneath their feet. It was people coming in and out, not just players, but coaches, staff, and things are still changing right now in that regard. But Odom and Lee collaborate on determining sort of the positional breakdown for revenue share. And I asked Brandon Lee, it's been out there that for college teams, that positional percentage by position breakdown is roughly similar to what it is in the NFL. And I don't have that right in front of me, but NFL teams sort of follow it as over time with the salary cap kind of come to a very structured, and you'll have some wiggle room, right? Like if you've got a rookie, if you've got a young quarterback on his rookie contract, you can spend more elsewhere. Or if you have to give Patrick Mahomes his extension, you have to spend less elsewhere, that sort of thing. But there's a rough breakdown of that. I asked Brandon Lee if that's what Purdue's roughly mirrors, and he said sort of. Brandon Lee has on a few occasions been very willing to talk through some of these things, and because I thought it was important to explain process to Purdue fans, but he doesn't divulge a lot of specific details, and I don't really begrudge him that. I wish he gave us more sometimes, but this is also and I last time I posted something, I tried to explain this to some fans because he said, oh, we've got a plan, and fans are kind of like, well, what's the plan? I'm like, well, they don't tell you the game plan for how they're going to beat Minnesota or Rutgers or whoever either. Like this is a competition. This is a battle. This is a game that you're playing out here. You're fighting opponents. And to that extent, I think talking about the game plan afterwards and what was successful and wasn't, I think will be fair game, but I understand why he's not giving us a lot of details. But anyway, he said roughly that's what it breaks down to. They have these parameters set up. And then you go to the scouting department that helps identify players. And that is Butler Benton, who they brought in, executive director of player personnel. That's someone like Brad Odom, who's the director of recruiting. That's someone like Xavier Goldsmith, who they just hired as the associate director of scouting to replace a couple of guys who had been here, I think even predated Barry Odom, who now have gone on to other jobs. And then Lee and his staff, there was Ethan Baxter here as the assistant GM before. That position doesn't exist. I think it's been replaced by some other things. But they handle the negotiations. And then Odom obviously has the final decision on whether they go over what they've slotted for players. This is, I think, a fairly common practice. The only way that I think Purdue's deviates sometimes is, and I wrote about this last year, that Barry Odom delegates more to his front office than some coaches do. Some coaches, and I talked to multiple coaches at Big Ten Media Day about this, like they feel, whether it's because they're control freaks or whether because they just want to do it, they control, they are very heavily involved in like every step of that process. And Odom likes to use his staff for what it is and give those people to delegate to those people. So it is a pretty structured format here. I think sometimes when people see things that don't live up to their expectations, they assume it's a mess, but it's not. Like these are professional guys who have set up this structure, and that is something that they're planning and executing things weeks ahead of time, even before the portal opens.
Yeah, and so when I talked to Brendan Lee briefly about this at Big Ten Media Days in July, it does help that he is a former player of Odom's. They know each other. It's probably why very much, Barry Odom's going to hire a person he trusts there and somebody who probably kind of thinks like him in terms of determining talent and what it's worth. So I think that is a good dynamic to have, and probably why Barry Odom delegates. I remember, I think you asked Brett Bielema, the Illinois coach, and he's like, no, I do it all. Like, I want to have the final say in all of this.
I mean, Brett Bielema said that. Kurt Signetti said that. I can't remember now who. Multiple other coaches said that. Like basically, like I do this. I'm the one that's in charge.
Yeah, and this is I think Purdue runs. Not knowing exactly how NFL front offices run, I feel like it probably mirrors a little bit what those places do. You let the GM do what he's there for, but you also get the say from the coaching staff and from the other people, the other executives on your staff, and kind of collaborate to come up with the best solution versus just the head coach saying, I want this guy, pay him X number of dollars and get him here.
And I don't mean to imply that Barry Odom's not in charge. Don't mishear that, because he is the final say on all of these matters. But there's just, and some of this could be semantic, and it could be just how a different coach interprets what I'm asking. But there were definitely coaches, I think Jed Fish from Washington was one of them, that are basically like, no, I'm the one who sits there with the spreadsheet. I'm entering the numbers. I am in charge of this. Like they don't have someone they trust, or again, some of these guys they'll even say it. I think Kurtz even said, because I'm a control freak, and he was only like half joking because a lot of these coaches are like, that's you have a certain makeup that gets you into these jobs sometimes. So I'm just saying, I think you're right. Like it's just a structure that, from what I'm told, a lot of programs use. It's just sometimes a matter of how much the head coach delegates in terms of the negotiation process from beginning to end, and just the money handling side of things. But Purdue, I thought when Barry Odom came in, I thought one of the biggest hires he was going to make, other than the offensive defensive coordinator that sort of help you set the identity of your program, was general manager. And it might have been the most important hire in some ways for the current landscape of college football. We'll move on to the second question. There's a lot of questions that are just about roster construction, which makes sense, and just sort of like the internal processes here. This is from Boiler Up 89. Why do the AD and head coach lie to us and say they have everything they need to compete with the best? Well, I think this is a good question to sort of delve into. And I think you're probably hearing this too, Sam, right? That I think there is still a general presumption among fans that Purdue, even not just that it doesn't have what the behemoths have, which is, Purdue is not ever going to be in a situation where it's equal to Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan, USC, other major programs like that. There's always going to be advantages there in terms of how much they're spending on football outside of revenue share, facilities, coaches, that sort of thing. But I think what fans think is happening is that Purdue is willingly shortchanging football in some way. Are you hearing that too? Like that's just a vibe I'm getting. And maybe it's the vocal minority that we get on Twitter, aka x.com.
Yeah. I don't, the term lying to us probably is a bit extreme, I would say. I think Purdue has, obviously the facilities are top notch. There might be some that have better facilities. Purdue certainly has better facilities than some other places. In terms of revenue share, yeah, Purdue's fully on board. So that's a wash across the board from the schools that you're competing against for talent. Where it does come down to is the NIL stuff. And I think that
revenue share and NIL are separate things, which is something we're going to get into in a second.
If you have the right agent or you're marketable enough, you can make a lot of money. Braden Smith is making a bunch of money in NIL because he's marketable. He's got a good agent. He's doing a lot of side work outside of basketball. But Purdue doesn't have that Texas Tech like billionaire that's just going to throw money and say, hey, make this happen. And I think that's maybe where people think that Purdue doesn't have what it needs to compete against some other people. And maybe that's where the fans say, it's all about who has the most money. True to a degree, I guess, maybe somewhat, but not the overarching thing. Like Minnesota doesn't have a ton of money, and its football program is winning 6 or 7 games every single year. So you can compete without, having Ohio State money or Notre Dame money or Texas Tech or whoever it might be. You might not be top-notch competing for national titles. IU threw a bunch of money, the alumni threw a bunch of money at football once Kurt Signetti had this kind of out of nowhere miraculous season last year. And now IU's competing with anybody in terms of finances and it can spend. And it's probably hard to do when you're 1-11 and you back it up with 2-10 to convince people to help your program out by donating some money.
So yeah, I have several notes here that are going to touch on a lot of these topics. So first of all, Mike Babinski has sat down with us when was that? June? It was last spring, maybe? I can't remember. Early last summer, and said he had said it before that they were going to do everything. He's saying we are fully participating in revenue share. It's up to $20.5 million, or was for this 2025-26 year. It goes up by an increment that I can't remember off the top of my head, but
it's not a ton of money, but
yeah, it's like $1 million or $2 million. It goes up every year, I think, roughly. for the next 3 years, and then they reevaluate. I don't have those specifics right in front of me. I apologize. But and then remember, out of that 20.5 million number, that there's a percentage that then goes to football. There's actually a little bit that came off the top for this year because they weren't going to just kick the Alfred payments non-revenue athletes out on the street. So there was still some there. I don't know how that's going to work in the future. We are scheduled tentatively to talk to Mike Bobinski soon, and we'll probably get some more answers as to how that actually breaks down. But so far, there is no evidence that Mike Bobinski lied, to use this query's term, when he said that they're not fully participating in revenue share. There's also no transparency. We're doing what we can. This is one of those journalism things where it's like trust but verify. I haven't seen any evidence and heard any evidence that Purdue is not fully participating in the revenue share. We are working to verify that. There's a report that comes out in January that is a mandated NCAA report. The problem is that isn't going to tell us anything about revenue share in 2025-26 because it's about the 2024-25 season. So there may be some data in there that tells us some things about NCAA or how Purdue spent money as it relates to these sort of things, but not what we really want to know. We're trying to go through some other channels to confirm things like that. As I said before, there's a difference between revenue share and third-party NIL. The schools can help with that to some extent, but as you said, it's really more on the players and their agents. All these players have agents now, and especially the ones who are the most marketable definitely have some sort of agent that they're working with. And I don't believe that Purdue is like heavily involved in the deals that Braden Smith is getting. I could be wrong about that, but I think most of that is set up through his agency, Mark Bartelstein, and those guys. Also, as I kind of said before, this isn't the NFL. It's not 32 teams with an equal chance at all players. That's not how this has ever worked. And it can both be true that Purdue has the resources equal to its peers in revenue share, not NIL, because like I said before, there are just differences. I mean, you mentioned Minnesota, and there's a lot of ways that those are peer programs, but Minneapolis is very different than West Lafayette, Indiana. Like Minneapolis is like an international cosmopolitan major city, and West Lafayette is what it is. And I enjoyed living in Tippecanoe County, but I'm a city guy. I would enjoy living in Minneapolis more. That's just me. So it can both be true that Purdue has those revenue share resources equal to its peers, and that it can't land the best players in the portal, especially at the most impactful decisions. And then this is going to lead us into a conversation that you and I were having on the way to Wisconsin this past weekend, which is, let's say Purdue and Illinois or Northwestern or Minnesota, again, those programs that I would consider their true peer programs in the Big Ten, are both interested in a guy. Purdue tells that player, we'll match any offer you get from any other school. Well, how many of those guys would come to Purdue for the same price instead of a place that's already winning? And then how much more would Purdue have to pay to get one of those players to come to Purdue instead of going to the place that is already winning? And does that make fiscal sense for Purdue? And how many positions can you really do that with when you have to upgrade, reinforce so many positions? So, and also you can only match in money, not in the probability of winning. I kind of crudely refer to it as sort of a losing tax, that in order to get the guys who are ranked at the top, but nationally in those positions, I don't know that Purdue is even getting really a foot in the door with a lot of those guys. That's why it's a lot of group of five guys. It's power four guys who weren't playing that much at the place they were at for whatever reason. It's FCS guys. And I think they're doing a good job as far as getting production, especially from the group of five in FCS. Like, it does seem like there's real production there. These aren't just speculative guys, whether they can play football or not. It's just a question of whether they can play Big Ten football, whether they're like top half of the Big Ten players that'll help Purdue rise up. But that was sort of the crux of the conversation you and I were having, that I understand why fans are frustrated right now. I really think that right now, the bigger deal for Purdue is evaluation. They have to be really on point with their evaluation of players and make sure they're getting the right guys. They're taking the right guys and they're passing on the right guys, because there's guys coming in for visits who aren't leaving with offers or certainly aren't leaving signed. And is Purdue making the right calls there?
Yeah, and back to the going 3 and whatever it is over 21 over the past 2 seasons. A lot of the guys that Purdue gets are either guys who have succeeded at a lower level and are leveling up, or are guys who were not the marquee player at a Power 4 school that are coming to Purdue hoping to be that. And then the guys Purdue has lost in the last couple of years. Obviously, a lot of those guys went to programs that were competing for conference national titles. A lot of guys that were in the college football playoff who were former Purdue guys. So I think right now, probably the hardest thing is just the stigma of what Purdue is, more than how much resources you have and things of that sort. But yeah, you're right. Purdue has to basically put a dollar figure on what these players are worth. And then, yeah, that can fluctuate depending on how bad you want somebody or what you have to do to lure them away from another program. But Purdue can't just be wildly spending to get a guy who's not going to be that much of an upgrade over, say, a Nitro Tuggle or, the D'Amico Kennedy or whoever it might be.
It's a bit of a damned if you do, damned if you don't in some ways, because as we talked about, we did a pod several weeks ago kind of outlining where we think Purdue needed to make the biggest impact in the portal, like what positions should be the priorities. And rush in was like my number one thing. Like that's where you can really transform a defense. It has ripple effects through the whole roster. And, if Purdue were to go out and get one of the top 5 or 10 rush ins in the transfer portal, it would be huge. It would be transformative. I don't know if they realistically can afford that guy because they can't get him for the same price that Ohio State, which I think has picked up at least one pretty decent rush in this cycle, or et cetera, et cetera. By the way, my timeline is basically filled from a football standpoint with 2 fan bases, Purdue and Ohio State, both at very different places in the college football landscape, both of whom are complaining about how much NIL or how much rev share or how their teams are using it right now. Because both of them came off of disappointments, like Purdue, obviously 2-10, Ohio State losing the Big Ten championship game, losing their first game in the playoff. You've got 2 fan bases who kind of retroactively, and in Ohio State, seeing some guys leave. So there's consternation all over the place. It's not just a Purdue thing. And I think Ohio State's probably going to be fine next year, but that's just kind of how fans think sometimes. But I just want to make sure people understand that when you see Purdue not going out and getting the best players in the portal, winning is also a currency. And it's why what I think has played out in the state of Indiana in these last 2 years in college football is a testament to 2 things. It's a testament to how much a head coach can transform a program when you hit like a clear home run, like all-time higher. I think it also speaks to how far it sets your program back if you pick the wrong guy or you handle it the wrong way. I think there's a combination of a couple of things that happened at Purdue with Ryan Walters, and they are still digging out of that hole. And I know it's not happening as fast as people want it to happen. We're only halfway through, not even this portal cycle being open. We'll see who else still comes available, who Purdue brings in. We'll see what this roster looks like come January 17th. But it's just not as easy. This isn't just going to the store and buying what you need and deciding what price, because the person you're acquiring, the commodity you're acquiring, can decide whether he wants to come play for you at that price. You know what I'm saying? The winning matters. It's players who have the option of going someplace that's already winning 7-8 games and is aspirant for more are probably going to see an upside to that they don't see at a place that's won 3 games in 2 years and is aspirant to get to 6 and get to a bowl game.
Yeah. And so, I think probably one of the marquee guys Purdue got in the portal is Jaden Mangum. He's a safety, played the last 2 years at Michigan, the 2 years before that at Michigan State. He's played significant snaps in the Big Ten, but he's not, he was an all Big Ten honorable mention guy at Michigan State a few years back. But, this is a guy who.
But I think that's huge. Like to get an honorable mention all Big Ten guy on a roster that only had 3 of those last year, 3 or 4 that were even honorable mention. Like now you start talking about, okay, well, that might be one of the top 15 safeties in the Big Ten or top, you know what I mean? And that starts to put you in the conversation. If you do that in enough positions, now you're winning 6 games.
Yeah. And I thought that's why it was kind of huge. And Anthony Speck, I hope I'm saying that right. He's a linebacker from Penn State who committed late on Tuesday. He's played 14 or 17 games, I think, in 2 years at Penn State. Hasn't played significant snaps, but again, a guy that is a Big Ten caliber player, a former top 500 recruit. Purdue's got a couple of those. One of those being a guy from USC who also hasn't played college football yet in 2 years, but you're getting guys who have upside. And if you can then coach that talent and get it out of them, you're putting yourself in a position. And something somebody said the other day on social media was like, well, Barry Odom already said his goal is to win 6 games. And it's like, no, his goal is to win every single game. But winning 6 games next year is a tangible goal that would, probably make amends for what went through last year in a lot of ways and show significant progress. And I think that's why he said when we're playing in a bowl game, he didn't say 6 games specifically. He said when we're playing in a bowl game next year, something. I can't remember exactly the statement he made, but that was kind of what he was alluding to.
Yeah, and I was actually kind of going back and forth with a fan. It might have actually been one of the ones I already mentioned here. We were having a good discussion on X earlier this week, and I see where fans come from, because on one hand, they see the 2-win season that should have been 4 and say, well, that just shows you how far they still are away, that they can't finish off wins that are right there. And you could also look at it and say, well, that was really a 4-win season, except they had so far to go that they couldn't get the margin for error down anywhere close to where it should reasonably be, where you make one mistake at the end of a game and it's just over. And I see both sides of that. Those are 2 sides of the same coin. They're not that far apart, really. And I think that what behooves Barry Odom is, in this coming year, that's what you have to see reduced, is that margin for error. It can't feel like you're every single game in the Big Ten that you have a chance to win, you're just dancing on a pinhead or whatever. You're walking on the edge of a blade. And that's what it felt like at Minnesota and Rutgers last year. And you could just, that tension is hard to win with if that's your best case scenario on a weekly basis. We have gone for almost a half hour already, so we better start speeding up a little bit. This is a question kind of staying on football. We've only got a couple of basketball questions today, a lot of football questions. This is from Tom Nipper. Am I the only one that wishes Purdue would give Brady Allen another shot? He was a stud in high school, and I know he fell in love with Braum, and that has cost him, but sometimes you just have to go for it. Nothing to lose. Coming out of high school, this was the next Mark Herman, so they said. Sam, you know Brady Allen better than I, because I wasn't here at that time. What do you know about this situation?
Brady Allen was Mr. Football. He had an incredible comeback to win a state title for Gibson Southern, I believe it was, and was a big-time prospect. He committed to Jeff Braum, played or was on the roster anyway during Braum's last season as Purdue's head coach. And when Braum left, Brady Allen stayed at Purdue and went through the spring season. And I think it became evident during that spring that Ryan Brown was ahead of Brady Allen. He was getting more of the snaps, especially at the end of camp, that first spring under Ryan Walters. And I'm going to guess Brady Allen probably saw the writing on the wall that Ryan Brown was ahead of him on the depth chart. And ultimately, he went back to Jeff Braum at Louisville. But, Brady Allen has a lot of talent. Sometimes there's more things than just talent that goes beyond that. And there's a lot of guys who are studs in high school who don't pan out at the college level. And I'm not saying that that's not possible, but he's now, 4 years into college, and he's hardly taken any snaps on the field. I think that says a lot about just where coaches and I guess the coach that he's had throughout his college career, Jeff Braum, thinks about his ability to go out there and lead the team to wins.
Yeah, Malachi Singleton, after being a backup at Arkansas and spending years a backup at Purdue, he transfers to App State, which is a good Group of 5 program. But I imagine thinking he has a stronger chance to get onto the field there. I would think that someone at Brady Allen's situation this late in his career is going to look for a place where he can play. The other dynamic here is Purdue adding a quarterback at all. I asked Barry Odom about this on signing day. He said it would depend on how many players left. At that time, there were going to be 6 scholarship players, the Corn Berry coming in with the 2026 class, 6 scholarship quarterbacks, unless I'm mistaken about somebody's scholarship status, but I believe I'm not, because I believe they still have 5 now in Ryan Brown, Evans Chuba, Bennett Meredith, Garrett Odom, and Corn Berry. That is a lot of scholarship load. I think 5 is fine. I think if you were to go to 6, and especially because you'd be talking about getting a quarterback out of the portal who is good enough to compete for the starting job, as much as I think they need that, I think that the competition in that room needs to be strong. And the fact that Ryan Brown was pretty far ahead of Bennett Meredith and Garrett Odom and Evans Chuba last year would lead me to think that they could have used someone else. But the money that they're already spending at that position is enough, from what I've heard, especially as it relates to Ryan Brown, that I don't think they can really afford, relative to all the other issues that they have, to go out and get another quarterback who is like starting caliber quality. They have to hope that Ryan Brown's year-to-year improvement, maybe Evans Chuba's year-to-year improvement, or Bennett Meredith. I think Chuba maybe has more upside just athletically, and at least more untapped upside, that you get something out of that. I just want to remind people again, I brought this up before, but last year, Preston Stone from Northwestern, 60% completions, Ryan Brown, 58.9. Preston Stone, 6.5 yards per attempt, Ryan Brown, 6.4. Touchdowns, Preston Stone threw a lot more, 17-9 for Brown, but also threw more interceptions, 12-10. And their quarterback ratings are not that dissimilar, 123-15 for Stone, 115-26 for Brown. One of those teams went to a bowl game, one of those teams didn't win a Big Ten game. And I think it's not unreasonable to say, because of everything else Purdue needs and how much it would cost to bring in a big-time quarterback, certainly, or even, like, it's just so expensive to bring in a quarterback who has the chance to start. Everybody's looking, so many teams are looking for one, that if you upgrade everywhere else, that gets you those 2 wins that got away last year and maybe more. I think that is the strategy here. Whether you like that strategy or not, I believe that is a strategy here. I think it's prudent to some extent. Whether it works, we'll see.
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot more to add there. I don't think that at this stage Purdue's adding a quarterback. I thought that it probably should, to push Ryan Brown for that starting job, but at this stage, and I haven't heard of any quarterbacks visiting that are portal guys, so I would say Purdue's probably set at that position.
It should also be noted here. Well, we'll come back to this in another question. It's going to come up in another question, but there's another dynamic here as it relates to what Purdue is doing. Tangentially, they relate to the quarterback. We're going to go to our buddy, Coach Eric Nowlin, who I would say, I don't want to embarrass him. I want to go on a limb, though, and say Coach Eric Nowlin from Rensselaer, one of the, 12 or 15 best boys varsity golf coaches in the Hoosier Conference. Is Rensselaer even still in the Hoosier Conference? I've been gone for a few years.
No, for one thing.
Okay.
This is he's a unique character. We'll just say that.
He's a lot of fun.
He's a big Purdue fan. He's traveled to a lot of postseason games.
Was at the Wisconsin game this past weekend.
The Wisconsin game the other night. And that's going to lead into kind of the question that I think you're going to next.
This actually, we shouldn't even. The questions will tell you a little bit about Eric. 2 questions. First, is there anybody not named Oscar Clough that either of you can beat in a beef eating contest? I think he means players on the Purdue basketball roster. Sam, what do you like your chances of a beef eating contest against Purdue's basketball team?
Well, I'm sure we could beat somebody, and it's going to depend on what beef. Now, if we're going Buena beef, or if we're going to Chicago and going to a beef place, I can put down some beef for sure. But yeah, some of these guys aren't very big guys. Braden Smith's 160, 170 pounds maybe. Fletcher Loyer is not a big guy. Daniel Jacobson, though he did add a bunch of muscle and much needed. I think those.
I don't think I can out-eat Daniel Jacobson. I'm not out-eating any of the big guys. if they want to.
But yeah, I think there are a few. I don't know specifics. I've never seen, we've never sat down and had dinner with these guys, so I don't know what they're capable of. They all make more money than us, so I'm sure their palates are a little bit more refined than what we eat sometimes too.
So I'm not only built for this, but I've trained for it, because every year, and COVID and some other things have interrupted this, plus the fact that I have to go cover a basketball team in the NCAA tournament every March. But I'm in a fantasy baseball league, rotisserie baseball, longstanding. Chicago is kind of like a hub of our league. And several years ago, we started, instead of a beer crawl, we do a beef crawl. So we go to I think originally we started trying to go to 4. Now it's 3 max, as we've all gotten older and more realistic. And you get a different Italian, you get Italian beef at each place, and we compare which one's the best one and which one had the best jardiniere. So I've been down this road a little bit, and you're right that there are definitely varying physiques on this team. But to me, I think it's kind of something I hinted at before. To me, it's more just about which of these guys have a lot at stake athletically, and maybe more dignity than you or I or Eric has, and are probably just going to pull the plug before they eat themselves sick. And we probably aren't going to do that. This is our chance to actually win something, is to out eat somebody. So that's why I think I would probably win, only because they would walk away from the table and I would probably sit there as long as it took.
Yeah. There's some positives to being in this job. There's some negatives. And I think maybe one of the negatives, and maybe a positive, depending on how you look at it, is you don't always have the most nutritious dining experiences when you're spending a whole day in a car and things like that. And so, yeah, I think that's where maybe our edge is, having been through, the Portillos and places like that over the years. But I think that's all we probably need to spend on that question. I think there are guys on the team that both of us are capable of beating in a beef eating contest.
I will say I do believe that I've shown some restraint by living 10 miles away from Portillo's and not weighing 400 pounds right now. I was really excited to move back this close to Portillo's, and I've moderated, I believe, my consumption. Eric did have another question, an actual basketball question. How great is Antoine West, the personality traits that Painter finds? He's clearly talented. He's so juiced on the bench. He's taking a red shirt and being a great teammate. And I think this is one of the things that is maybe a little bit of a behind the scenes thing. If you're not at games at Mackey Arena, you probably don't see it as much. You might get glimpses here and there on TV, but Antoine West, for a guy who took a red shirt, and I don't want to say he took it reluctantly, but he definitely had to ponder whether he really wanted to go down this route, because I think all along, up through when he signed, there was no question in his mind he'd be on the floor this year. And then they get Omer Meyer after that, and it changes the dynamic of the roster. But he's very active on the sidelines. He's one of the more animated guys on the bench. And just talking to him several weeks ago for a piece that I wrote, he said he'd come to terms with the fact that he belongs here, and he sees this as his way to be a productive teammate.
Yeah, and that's, when Matt Painter evaluates people, he's not just evaluating their basketball talent. And he's talked about it before with CJ Cox. He went to a tournament, not recruiting CJ Cox, saw his mannerisms, saw how his teammates acted around him. And he's like, hey, that guy is a good teammate. He's a good team player, and he can play ball. So, he's checking all the boxes there. And Painter obviously added him to the list of guys that he wanted to get to West Lafayette. Antoine West is a very talented player. We sat through a portion of Tuesday's practice, and he's a scout team point guard going up against, in this case, he was going up against Omer Meyer when they would go head to head. And he belongs. He's a guy that can go head to head with a guy who's getting minutes for a top 5 team in the country. So very talented player. It's just when you have the roster makeup that you do right now, it benefits Purdue better long-term to have that year on the back end. Much like when Trey Coppin-Wren came in, it was like, hey, you can play limited minutes as a true freshman, or you can be an all Big Ten player at the end of your career. Which do you want to do? And I think this is very much the same case as like next year, Braden Smith's going to be gone. You do bring in Luke Girdle, but I think the opportunity for more minutes and also just sitting back and seeing it for a year probably benefits him. And the most positive thing out of all of this is going back to what you said. he's on the bench. He's coming off the bench, high-fiving guys, cheering. He's boisterous. And if you're not going to play, you've got to bring something. And that's what he's added in games this year.
Yeah, and to go back to just sort of that scouting thing, Brandon Brantley had a connection to West's high school coach, Anthony Stacy, who's now an assistant at Bowling Green, but he was the head coach at Toledo Whitmer. And he had come in the first time they saw him. He came in, or first they visited him anyway, went to Whitmer for a really early morning practice. And Brantley was impressed by the way West was attacking that super early morning practice because he's seen enough high school kids at 5 a.m. or whatever, 6 a.m. to know what that looks like. And West looked different. So that was one of the early impacts that he made on the coaching staff, and it has paid off to this point. It's easy for us to sit here and say, like, this isn't a rejection of the player you are today. It's an embrace of the player you'll be in 3 to 4 years. It's tougher to sit it out. And it's not like everybody else who's done that sits over there and mopes, but his activity is notable, is noticeable. Back to Purdue football, and this was something that I had kind of put a pin in before, talking about the roster approach. Let me actually find the question. I lost the question.
Okay, it's
about the
offensive line and defensive line, and putting more time and attention into recruiting those positions, because football, that's kind of where the game is won and lost in a lot of cases. So.
Yes, just basically saying, and it wasn't really so much a question. It was like, go tell the coaches they need to.
We're not in a position to tell the coaches how to do their job by any means. So
I found it now. It's from Eric Meadors. Sorry if I mispronounced that. Well, a couple of things. I think you're already seeing evidence of this. I wrote something last summer after talking to the coaching staff and getting a sense of the recruiting approach that they had prioritized this in 2020, the 2026 class. I think 9 of the 21 players on signing day were either offensive linemen or defensive linemen. And that was intentional, because not just because I think they felt like there was a need there at those positions for the long term, but it also directly relates to the transfer portal dynamic, because it's about being cost effective. It's about payroll control, frankly. Offensive linemen and defensive linemen are expensive. It's frankly why you see some marginal offensive line, defensive line guys from Purdue leave for the portal. And I mean marginal in terms of these guys aren't all Big Ten guys, but look at back at the list of guys who have left so far. I had it right here. 1 second. Well, I lost it. But D'Amico Kennedy is at Louisville. Chops Harkless is at Kentucky. Hank Purvis is at South Carolina.
Marcus
Joyner at Florida State. They're going to other Power 4 programs and powerful programs that are winning, because that's when I covered Ohio State, there was a guy named Vic Cutler. They were so desperate for defense or offensive line help, especially they just left themselves with like no backup center somehow, because they had a guy leave early for the draft that they weren't expecting. So they get this guy from Louisiana Monroe named Vic Cutler, who nobody had really ever heard of, but they were I think they paid him really well to come just be the backup for 1 year, and by a deep backup on the depth chart, because they're just so desperate for offensive line talent. Like, these are the positions, other than quarterback, offensive line, defensive line are the expensive positions. And you've seen this be the focus of the early portal returns too, right? You get the 2 offensive linemen from USC. You got a JUCO defensive lineman with 9 sacks. So that's not really a portal, but guys that they've just brought in the past week, several of them are on the offensive line, defensive line. So I get where you're coming from with that question, Eric, but I think the staff is already there. I think they're there. And I think if look at things again in mid-January when the portal is over, but I think they have prioritized the offensive line and defensive line. Now it's just a matter of whether the guys you can get are good enough to win at the top of the Big Ten. Yeah.
And again, the connections to the USC were there, but you pull a guy from USC who played 11 games last year. That's a significant get, and a sign that you're focused on replacing what you had. And granted, some of the linemen Purdue had last year came back. Braden Joyner leaving hurts, Hank Purvis leaving hurts. But they still had to upgrade, even if those guys came back across the offensive line. It wasn't very good last year. Getting a guy like that, getting Makai Sena, however you say it, from USC is big. And then Purdue also got a D tackle from I think it's North Carolina Central, Wisdom Sims, another guy that they went out and got. And defensive linemen typically aren't going to have eye-popping stats. That's not their role in a lot of cases. But if you get guys that can clog lanes and allow linebackers to come and clean up the mess and things like that, that's really significant value there. And, when you looked at Wisdom Sims, I think he had 3 sacks last year, but he probably did a lot of other good things that Purdue sees that can help it. And to answer your question, I think Purdue is targeting those positions. Those guys typically don't play as true freshmen in the Big Ten. People forget too that TJ Lindsey is coming back from a torn ACL, and he probably was in line to be Purdue's best defensive lineman last year before he got hurt.
No, he was off to a good start. He had done good things in preseason camp and back into the spring even, and it was showing them upside. And then it was just that didn't help their cause. You wonder, is a player of that talent, it's not like he was probably going to be first team All Big Ten, maybe not even third, but to take that guy out of the tackle rotation, does he make one play against Minnesota and or Rutgers? You know what I'm saying? Like there's ripple effects of those things. So that can't be overstated. I think he is someone that they're expecting to come back strong. Let's see. Stan Mason. Canadian geese are everywhere. They are often a nuisance, yet they are a protected species. Should it be legal to catch them and eat them in urban areas? Sam?
So when I first moved to Tippecanoe County, I moved to Lafayette on a place on Creasy Lane, and that's over 2 decades ago now. There was they had the retention ponds all over the apartment complex, and those things were everywhere, to the point where I went outside one time and one walking its little goslings down the sidewalk thought I was a threat and flew up and attacked me and jumped me on my head. And that was, I kind of shooted away and swatted at it, and probably looked like I was trying to box a bird. It's close I got to kind of intentionally harming an animal like that. But they are everywhere. I don't know if I want to eat Canadian geese. Some people might think that's a good meal, but I wouldn't. But I think there are a lot of people who are on board with this. I don't want to get PETA involved with this or whatever, but definitely overpopulated species around these parts. And the more and more you put small bodies of water around, the more it's going to be a problem.
I'm sure there may be some benefits to the ecosystem from them. I don't know. I don't know that we should be able to kill and eat them. I do think we should be able to enslave them. I don't know exactly what that would look like. Some kind of manual labor you could train them to do. I think that would be enough. If we have to put up with them, let's put them to good use. I will say that I was doing planning work on this podcast, sitting on my couch in the basement last night. My wife, who's also a journalist at the Star, came and sat down next to me and saw that I had a page up, on a Google page up about Canadian geese. And she's like, "What is that?" And I told her, I don't think I even told her, because then she looked at the notes I was making, and I just had a thing that says legal to catch and eat Canadian geese. And I thought she was going to fall off the couch laughing at me. So thanks for sending that in. We like the nonsense questions. I think it keeps it light and it helps us kind of just have some fun with this once in a while.
Yeah, briefly to tie Purdue into that a little bit. Years ago,
this is going to be good. I want to hear this.
We used to do this thing when you worked in Lafayette. We did this thing called a golf guide every year, every spring, and we had to go out and do features on golf, people involved in golf and golf courses and things like that. And one of the stories I did, there was a person who ran the Burke Boilermaker golf complex named Jim Scott, and they had an overpopulation of Canadian geese on the golf course, and people pay good money to play golf. They don't want to hit the ball in the fairway and then be at risk of a goose taking your ball or just being in the way and ruining your score. So Purdue actually hired a dog to go out and round up those geese and get them off the golf course because it was such a problem out there. And I ended up writing a feature story about a dog that was technically employed by Purdue, wasn't on the payroll, but there were a lot of perks for that dog, I assure you.
You didn't do an open records request for that dog's contract and see, did it have a
dog would have an NIL deal today for some sort of milk bones or something? I don't know.
See, that's where my enslavement idea comes in. We should just train them to fetch the balls out of the water hazards. or out of a tree or whatever. Like people aren't thinking this through enough. You don't just be reactionary and think, let's just exterminate them. Let's put them to use if they're going to hang around. Sonny Black, back to football. Most of these are football, by the way, but we're going to do our usual post game, I think, from Mackey Arena tonight after the Washington game. We didn't do one after Wisconsin because it was really super late with some of the Braden Smith stuff that pushed things, and we were just ready to get on.
It will be late again tonight, but hopefully not that late.
Yeah,
even though it is a later start.
It is a later start, but we'll talk a little basketball tonight from Mackey Arena. This is from Sonny Black. Can Purdue ever make a bowl game given they schedule tough non-conference opponents? Why not schedule 3 cupcakes and start off with 3 wins and some confidence rather than starting off behind the 8 ball? That would instantly turn things around and probably get you into a bowl. Well, a couple of points that I would put out there. Number one, Purdue played a FCS and a group of 5 and started off 2-0 this year. So 2-0 and 3-0 are different, but not substantially different. And you're always probably going to have, I think that Big Ten schools should still be scheduling 1 Power 4 opponent every year. It just seems weak to me to not do that. But I know that there are ones that don't do it, and maybe it's prudent at this juncture of your program to do that. The problem is football schedules are set years ahead of time. Currently, they are scheduled to play 2 Power 4s in each of the next 3 seasons. Only 1 in 2029, that's at Vanderbilt, and only 1 in 2030, that's at TCU. But those are the only games on those schedules right now. So they could be adding others, and I don't know what's going to happen with the Notre Dame series. This is definitely a topic that's probably worth bringing up with Mike Bobensky when we see him next. He and Tiffany Grimes, I think, is very involved with the football scheduling. But this goes back to Jeff Brom, really, right? Jeff Brom wanted a tough non-conference schedule, and that's what Purdue scheduled for. And now Jeff Brom's not here anymore, but the schedule that he preferred to have is still very much here.
Yeah, I'm trying to find it here. I think they're scheduled to play like Ole Miss in like 2033 or 2035 or something like that.
Yeah.
So
up through 2031, they have a break. There's one year where they play like UConn and is the only team on the schedule, which is why I stopped it with 2031. But yes, they have a home and home with Ole Miss after that.
Yeah, and I think that UConn game is the second part of a 2-part series that they played UConn 4 or 5 years ago. Yep. So that just tells you, because Jeff Brom hasn't been at Purdue in 4 seasons, how far out sometimes these things are scheduled. And yes, you can buy those games out. Can be expensive, but also I think that it's not unheard of. Purdue and Wake Forest. I know Wake Forest had a great year this past season, but that's a game that most of the time you feel should be competitive, winnable even. Like you said, Purdue wouldn't have gone to a bowl game either of the last 2 years if it had scheduled an FCS opponent or a MAC team or whoever instead of Notre Dame, for example. Still would have been just possibly one more win on the schedule that doesn't really get you into a bowl game. So I do think, to go back to the other part of that question, Purdue is capable of making a bowl game and making one this season. I don't think the schedule is that daunting in the conference. And we talked about Purdue really could have won 4 games last year. Then it's can you maybe pick off somebody you're not supposed to and then have some things go your way in another game? I don't think Purdue is as far away from being bowl eligible as some people think, because they look at the win total from the past 2 years.
Yeah, again, that 4-win season that Ryan Walters had should have been more than 4. The 2-win season last year probably should have been 4. Now, that's not good enough, and that's not bowl eligible, but it looks like a closer springboard to getting you back to that 6 wins. And so in one way, does it seem close and tangible and easy to reach? Yes. I do think, like right now, at this program's juncture, to be playing both Wake Forest and Notre Dame next year, seems unnecessarily tough. Like, why did you do that to yourself? But you did it to yourself at a time where Jeff Brom is going to the Big Ten championship game and winning 9 games and winning bowl games. And that's what makes this tricky. It's not as if you're making basketball. They make their schedule typically, like right now, this basketball schedule has 2 games on it that I know of, right? They have the home and home that's coming up with Tennessee, and they finish with the road trip to Iowa State next year. Those are the only two that I think we absolutely know about, plus the ones that we know from their Big Ten schedule. But non-conference, we don't know a lot about that schedule because it's still being made. But football schedule's done.
Yeah, and they're done years in advance. And basketball, what Matt Painter has done is scheduled comparable to the talent he has, which right now he has elite talent. So that's why the schedule has been so good here in recent years, because you want to challenge yourself. When you go back to the non-conference schedule, say in like 2014, it wasn't as challenging.
I just want to run this down too real quick, because yes, Jeff Brom liked to schedule tough. You can argue whether he should have scheduled as tough as he did, I suppose. But I'm going to look back at his tenure real quick. 2017, his first game against Louisville and Indianapolis, they lose that. Home against Ohio. I don't remember what Ohio was doing at that time. It's generally a solid MAC program. And especially recently, they've had some really good offenses and some good teams. And then Missouri at home, and they win that game. So they go on to make the Foster Farms Bowl and beat Arizona. 2018, they play Eastern Michigan at home and lose. Eastern Michigan, not an especially great MAC team usually, or it wasn't at that time, I don't think. They lose to Missouri at home. They beat Boston College. They do then go on to make the Music City Bowl and get absolutely crushed by Auburn in just one of the worst games I've ever seen. 2021, their non-conference is Power 4, Oregon State. They win. Group of 5, UConn, and win. They lose to Notre Dame, make the Music City Bowl, beat Tennessee. 2022, they beat Indiana State, lose to Syracuse, beat Florida Atlantic, and make the Citrus Bowl and get crushed by LSU. So in none of those cases were they playing what I would call a cupcake non-conference schedule. You're always playing at least one Power 4, and you still make a bowl. So yes, you can schedule yourself in such a way that it makes it easier to make a bowl, and you can argue whether that then helps you build recruiting momentum, the fact that you get to say, we're winning, we're going to a bowl. I would also say that there are coaches who would look at that and say, the other reason people come to Purdue is because it's a Big Ten program, and we give them exposure to get them to the next level. We put them on the field with other NFL players, so they have NFL film. They have film to show NFL teams and get noticed and make that jump to the next level. And playing Notre Dame, playing other Power 4 non-conference opponents helps you do that. It's a thin line. I think they probably need to, as it relates to the next schedule where they have openings, which I don't have right in front of me, but it's worth, I think, discussing long-term. Also, the other thing to remember here, man, I'm really dragging this out. Yes, Jeff Brom had that mentality, and then the Big Ten expanded, and it added Oregon, which is an annual playoff team. It adds Washington, which was in the national championship game 2 years ago. It added USC, which is like this sleeping giant that at any point they could figure things out and become a behemoth again, which happens like once a generation. And in UCLA is not exactly garbage. So the Big Ten got tougher on its own since Jeff Brom started scheduling that way, or they started scheduling that way with Jeff Brom's in tangent with him. So yes. That's just another thing to remember here.
Right now, the first schedule with openings is 2030. Purdue plays Wake Forest, Notre Dame next year, along with Indiana State. Plays Notre Dame, Miami, Ohio, and North Carolina the year after that.
Yep, 2 Power 4s.
Then returns the Wake Forest trip the year after that, and Notre Dame again. I think that's the last year of the Notre Dame series as it's contracted right now. So, I don't know if that'll be renewed or not. That's something we might ask Mike Wobinski, but Mike Wobinski might not be here when that comes up. UConn at Vanderbilt is a return game that now looks a lot tougher. Granted, it's 4 years down the road, but
who knows who's coaching Vanderbilt 4 years from now.
But then in 2030, the only game on the schedule as of now is at TCU, and that's a tough opponent most years too. So you go there, you've got the North Carolina return trip, and then Ole Miss in 23 and 20 or 33 and 34, and then beyond that, who knows? But I'll be surprised if they ever get to that Ole Miss series, mostly because I don't think that these conferences are done expanding yet.
You also, it comes down to balancing your revenues too. When the years where you have 5 Big Ten home games, that's when you typically will play the group of 5 or the Power 4 road game on your schedule, and then the opposite. You'll probably play 3 non-conference home games the years that you have 4 Big Ten home games. And you're getting paid, obviously, for that game that you play on the road that year. So it is about kind of balancing some things out. I do think, though, in those future years, I think just as a general rule, until Purdue achieves a different tier of college football consistently, which it has never really achieved into that highest tier. When I was again covering Ohio State, they had a policy that they played 1 Power 4 every year, unless something freaky happened, then they had to change the schedule late. But it was 1 Power 4, 1 MAC school, and then usually like 1 other group of 5. Once in a while, it had to be an FCS, like Youngstown State or whatever. But it was typically some mix like that. And I don't know why Purdue wouldn't just do that. In fact, for Purdue, it should probably be just standardize it, like 1 FCS, 1 group of 5, probably MAC, something like that, and or UConn, whatever, and then 1 Power 4. I think it's fine to still have 1 Power 4 program on your schedule, but if it's going to be Notre Dame, if you're going to keep that around, if you're going to be playing the likes of Ole Miss, it's hard for me to justify playing another Power Conference team on top of that.
Yeah. And again, these schedules, who knows what becomes of them down the road, because we're kind of slowly getting to a point where there's just 2 massive conferences in college football. So we'll see what happens there. But I think that you at least get to probably that North Carolina game 2 years from now when you also play Notre Dame.
Okay, we're down to the last couple of questions. We've had a pretty long one here. Brad Eben, one of our most loyal listeners and tweeters. So thanks, Brad. What's your favorite childhood Christmas present? Do you have one that immediately comes to mind, Sam?
I would. So we both have young children now, and we're getting to first see the joys of them experiencing opening Christmas presents and understanding a little bit, yours more than mine, what's happening. So going back to kind of that, I mean, you're a little bit older than I am, not much, but growing up in the 80s, I got a Nintendo one year for Christmas. I was, I think, 5 or 6 years old. And that was the greatest invention of all time, because before that you had the Atari, which was a joystick and an orange button for people who are old enough to remember. And then Nintendo seemed like this very innovative gaming system that was, came with Duck Hunt and Mario. So you already had the built-in entertainment for a few weeks. Those games were very easy. So I think the point was to get you to go out and buy more cartridges to keep playing. But just being kind of the year I was born, falling in line with when that became a big thing, I would say probably the Nintendo Entertainment System, circa 1987 or 88, probably.
For some reason, I don't remember I have stories from things that I got for Christmas, but I don't remember one that was my favorite. But my favorite story is I have a brother that's 4 years younger than me, and so for a while, I was off at school, but he was still young enough he was going to be at home. Because he was a toddler, whatever. And back then, you couldn't just order stuff off Amazon. You literally had to go, I guess they had Sears catalog or whatever, but you basically went and bought in person everything for your Christmas presents. And so my dad was I was a big G.I. Joe fan, and they had this SR-71 Blackbird jet plane, like the G.I. Joe jet plane. It was like this black, sleek plane. And that was like what I wanted for Christmas. And so my dad went and bought that at Target or whatever, but he had to take my brother with him because it was during the day. And so in order to explain why they were buying this, he told my brother, oh, it's for grandpa. Because I think they then went and hid the presents at my grandparents' house, which was like 5 minutes away, a different town. And so then that night at dinner, my brother is just sitting there eating whatever. And he's like, oh, we got grandpa an SR-71 Blackbird today. And I was like, what are you talking about? You're crazy. Why would you, you're stupid. What are you talking? Why would you buy grandpa an SR-71 Blackbird? He's like, no, we did. We bought one. Tell him, Dad. I'm like, and then he's completely blowing it. But I'm too stupid at that age to realize what's actually at play, because I still believe in Santa Claus or whatever. And then when I opened the SR-71 Blackbird on Christmas morning, it was still a surprise, because I was too stupid to understand that my brother was spoiling the surprise for me.
So then you said, hey, Grandpa, I got one of those too.
Yeah. It's wait a second. Oh, yeah. I show up at Grandpa's house later that day. Hey, let's go play with our SR-71 Blackbirds. A final question here that I thought was a great question, and I wish we had left more time for it. We're going to have to kind of do a truncated version of this question, but from DS Sutton, if IU is 100 of 100 in the new college football world, what is Purdue's ranking? This is just a fantastic question. We really could probably do a whole podcast just on this question. But Sam, what number did you come up with, and how did you get there?
I don't know how you gauge or what kind of a system you're using, but whatever system it is, I would agree that IU was the top tier of whatever that is. If it's out of a 100-point scale, then IU was 100 based on what it's done the last 2 years. And
I think you would rate. I think 100 of 100 is a legitimate number to put out there. And I'm usually someone who's like, well, you can't go 100 because there's nowhere left to go. But relative to where they were for the entirety of their history, to now be the number 1 seed and be 2 games away from winning a national championship, be the Big Ten champion, like I think you could argue 100 out of 100. Like if in terms of like fan enjoyment, certainly, right? Like fan satisfaction, they're probably beyond 100.
Yeah. So to put this in perspective just a little bit, IU before this run the last 2 years lost at Ross-Ade Stadium to Purdue, the program that we've been saying has all these problems since, with Brendan Sorsby, the highest paid player in the portal, as starting quarterback. So that's where IU was 2 years ago.
That's a heck of a way to put that. I had not really put the connections together on that.
But yeah, I think Purdue is probably 61 out of 100, which is a D- on a lot of scales, or something like that in an educational system. I think there's obviously a lot of room for improvement, but again, I think that we look at what Purdue's been up against comparative to its schedule. I think Purdue is much further ahead of some teams that are in bowl games that just are in smaller conferences and play teams, and that's because Purdue has the resources and the exposure, the TV contracts, things like that. But nationally, I don't think Purdue is anywhere near like the worst college football team in the country. I think it might be the worst Power 4 program in the country, or certainly one of 2 or 3. But yeah, it's somewhere in the middle. It's teetering on DF status right now, but I think there's a lot of room to go do some extra credits and bump that grade up before the final report cards come out.
Man, you are an easy grader. I guess I didn't look at it as like being equivalent to the grade scale, right? I was just like, you have 100 points or 100, this scale of 1 to 100. And what if you look at it as like a spectrum, where would Purdue fall on there? I mean, they have 7 wins the last 3 years. 2 of those are FCS and 1 is a group of 5. No FBS wins the last 2 years. No first, second, third team All Big Ten players last year. You had 2 in 24, and one of them, Max Clare, transferred to one of your Big Ten rivals. Now, attendance hasn't plummeted. You're not seeing the same apathy as you did under Darrell Hazel, but I kind of wonder if we're at a turning point on that. Like if 2026 isn't really a step forward, do you start to see it in the stands more than we've seen it so far? And we'll keep an eye on things like season ticket renewals and what that looks like going into next year. And the fact that IU is as good as it is, and this is something that nobody at Purdue would want to say, but if we're just judging it from the outside, if you're talking about the college football landscape, IU being where it is does push Purdue a little bit farther down. It emphasizes how bad things are at Purdue right now. It'd be one thing if IU was still just a 4 or 5 win max program and Purdue was struggling to be there, and IU was beating them by normal scores in the bucket game. But the fact that there's a gulf between these programs, I think, factors into this score. The upside right now for Purdue is still very incremental. It feels very incremental. And I think even if you're optimistic about next season, it still feels like you're optimistic for a small improvement or maybe a 6-win ceiling as opposed to like some big breakthrough like what IU had. So I'm thinking like 27. You're not losing to FCS programs. You're not losing to mediocre group of 5 programs. There is room to be worse than what Purdue has had. But I also think relative to its expectations, to not be winning any Big Ten games, to be getting just obliterated by your rival for whatever reason that's happening. It has more to do with Indiana in some ways than it does Purdue, the extent of those wins. I don't know how you could go higher than that. And I actually raised it up the more I thought about it, because I think you do take the schedule into account a little bit, as we were just talking about. It's a tough schedule. And at the same time, that's why they haven't maybe pushed for a bowl in like that 4-win season. The schedule would have helped them, but that schedule had nothing to do with why they only won 1 game or 3 games in the last 2 years. The schedule from a Big Ten standpoint has been manageable to get Big Ten wins, and they haven't done it. So 27 is the number I'm throwing out there without like a real mathematical exploration. And that leaves a lot of room for improvement, obviously, because I think if they were winning 6 games, but still getting destroyed by IU, I guess I look at it that way. If they had won 4 games last year and gotten blown out by IU and had roughly this same portal experience they're having right now, that to me would be like a 61. Like, you're still, relative to your schedule, it's still really teetering on the point of failure, but you get a little bit of grace for that schedule and you're on your way back up. That to me would be like 61. They have to get back to that level still.
That's fair. Yeah. And like I said, I don't know what kind of a scale we're using. We kind of just took the question as is and interpreted
it's
our
not
own
scientific.
way. So that's, I think, 10 or 11 questions that we went through.
I think it was a big 10
minutes. So,
yes.
Not quite 10 minutes a question, but I think that this is a lot of fun. I think we should do one of these again.
This is a great format. I hope everybody liked it. If those of you who participated with questions, thank you. Feel free to send us questions anytime, and we can bring this up every time we do a podcast. It doesn't have to be a special one. I'm on X. Sam is on X. I'm NW Baird. He's Samuel T. King. Or you can email us. You can DM us. If you have our phone number, I suppose you can call or text us, but we're not giving those out. But yeah, thanks for participating. Anything you want to say as we sign off, Sam?
No. I think we've delved into this long enough. We'll be back tonight at Mackey Arena. Purdue plays Washington, 8:30 tip, trying to win its 6th straight game. So if you're up 11:30-ish, probably, go ahead and jump on.
Yeah, we'll try to go live after the game tonight. So thanks a lot, and we'll talk to you then.